Looking back at a woman who lost her life 28 years ago isn't easy, especially when this woman spent her years in the public eye, smiling and pretending everything was fine. Society searches for the perfect victim, a flawless angel. That's why we only raise our voices as one when it comes to children. We can't manage to listen to a woman's story with all her mistakes and good deeds and honor her respectfully. If she's not a perfect angel, she must be the devil. She must have tried to manipulate us by telling her own story. We look for faults. We try to prove how right, how moral we are by trampling on the guilty. But does it mean nothing that millions who witnessed this woman's life said goodbye to her in tears, as if she were family, in deep mourning? If one of the world's most privileged women simply stopped staying silent and inspired millions of women living vastly different lives, but fundamentally struggling with the same oppression, isn't that revolutionary? The headline of the Sunday Times on June 7, 1992, read, "Diana driven to 5 suicide bids by uncaring Charles." The architect of this headline was Andrew Morton, who worked as a royal correspondent at the Daily Star in the 80s. Diana, whose psychological crises and eating disorder we know about today, appeared inexplicably thin and exhausted at the time. Andrew Morton was determined to learn more about Diana. Infiltrating Diana's inner circle wasn't easy at all, especially for a reporter. In 1986, he met a doctor who was a close friend of Diana's and developed a friendship with him over the years. By the late 80s, the press had started hearing rumors about problems in Charles and Diana's marriage, but no one dared to talk about an issue that would damage the royal family's perfect image. This was a matter that wasn't spoken about loudly even within the family, only implied. If they acknowledged Charles's relationship with Camilla, Diana's crisis would gain legitimacy. Charles's mask, who dismissed her attacks as empty hysterical fits, would fall. Damaging the future king's reputation wasn't in anyone's interest. Diana was also aware of Andrew Morton's attempts to approach her. When her own extramarital affairs started leaking to the press and making headlines, she realized that if she continued to stay silent, she would be forced to live with the label of the treacherous woman who was disloyal to the future king. She decided to fight. She would tell Andrew Morton everything. The process that followed proceeded with the precision of a spy operation. Since Andrew visiting Diana would arouse suspicion, the interviews were conducted by the doctor who was Diana's friend. Diana would give palace staff days off during those times and check the room for listening devices before the interviews. Andrew could only listen to the recordings once, then return them to the doctor. He thought keeping the recordings in his office was risky. He realized how right he was when he arrived at work one morning to find his office ransacked. This was followed by strange phone calls and threats. His phone was probably being tapped too. In the previous video, you heard about the conditions that turned Lady Diana into Princess Diana, the royal journey that seemed like something out of a fairy tale but was painfully real. Now you'll hear the story of a woman who decided to stop running from her reality and fight, determined to take everyone on for this cause. Before we start, make sure you're subscribed, pour yourself a cup of English tea with milk and enjoy this journey. If you're ready with your judgmental looks, I'm starting. The prison of royal life. When Diana was pregnant with Prince William, she was looking for something to hold on to in her life that felt like a prison. Her crises, her husband who didn't even consider her worthy of fighting with, her rage attacks. One of these lifelines would undoubtedly be the child she would bring into the world, the future heir to the throne. Another was the long phone conversations she had every evening with friends she could barely see anymore. Yet another must have been the reputation war she would wage with the press, which wanted to reduce her to an elegant clothes hanger or a magazine figure. She needed to prove to the public that she was more than a pretty face and an elegant body, that she was worthy of the duty bestowed upon her. But how would Diana, who always felt inadequate and flawed deep down, accomplish this? It hadn't been announced yet, but Diana became pregnant with Prince William in September 1981 and went on a 3-day Welsh tour with Charles in October. It became clear here how much royal duties and tours would strain her. Despite her nausea and exhaustion, she had to accompany Charles on this intense schedule. On the 3rd day, she gave part of her speech about how proud she was to be the Princess of Wales in Welsh. She received a huge applause. Everywhere they went, people came to see Diana, not Charles. Those who ended up on Charles's side rather than Diana's huffed and puffed, grumbled. Charles couldn't stand that his wife, who didn't even want to participate in these duties and was barely convinced, was also getting more attention and love than him. He didn't hesitate to throw this in Diana's face while sitting in the car or in their rooms. He made Diana, who already felt guilty, feel even more guilty. Diana's first solo duty was to turn on the lights on Regent Street in London in November 1981 and give a short speech. She was so nervous that it was a very quick speech with little eye contact with the crowd. She constantly felt nauseous. Diana's ability, or perhaps curse, to hide how bad she felt behind her big smile was inherited from her mother. This ability served her well not only among the public, but also within the royal family, or as she called it, the firm. During this period, Diana mostly stayed at Buckingham Palace, while their home at Kensington Palace was being renovated. They were only able to move into their own home shortly before the birth. Diana believed she would feel better with the birth, but this time postpartum depression wouldn't leave her alone. During this period, Charles, taking every opportunity to seek solace with Camilla, was also soul-crushing. She even once heard Charles say on the phone, "Whatever happens, I will always love you." On most nights when Charles wasn't home, Diana couldn't sleep from overthinking. During one of their fights, Charles admitted that his father had told him that if the marriage didn't work out, he could continue his bachelor habits as before. Diana realized she had to fight not just Charles, but the entire family's aristocratic codes about Camilla. They would never see the problem in Charles. The problem would always be her, the one who was constantly crying, nauseous, making scenes. When Charles stopped hunting and became vegetarian, Diana was blamed both within the family and among the public. Hunting and displaying the heads of hunted deer in the hall, taking pride in hunting achievements, was a royal tradition. Where did this new custom come from? Diana was thought to be controlling Charles. In reality, Diana was in a very passive position in their marriage. Forget controlling him, even asking Charles where he was became a reason to fight. The media turns. By the end of 1981, the press's opinion of Diana had completely reversed. She was portrayed as a spoiled woman who spent fortunes on clothes and embarrassed her husband. She was also held responsible for palace staff leaving. For example, the resignation of Charles's valet Stephen Barry was also blamed on Diana. In reality, the man was living with HIV and died after resigning. When Diana started treatment for her depression, going to therapy, the shadow of the royal family was over her. She noticed that several specialists she saw would talk to Charles behind her back and relay what she told them in sessions. Finding a trustworthy specialist would take a long time. Over time, Diana completely stopped seeing the old friends she could barely meet anyway. Although they found Diana's life very interesting and enviable, Diana saw the freedom she had lost in their ordinary lives and felt even worse. Everywhere she went, she had a security guard keeping her under surveillance, and she was incapable of making even very simple decisions about her own life. For example, in 1983, the decision to take baby William with them on their Australian tour had a bombshell effect. She didn't want to leave her still dependent baby alone with nannies for 4 weeks like an ordinary mother would. But this was unheard of in the royal family. The Queen had always put her duties before her children. The Australian trip further cemented Diana's starring role and Charles's supporting role in the public eye, and it reinforced Charles's anger toward Diana, whom he blamed for taking away his freedom. How was this helpless woman, this troublemaker, managing to captivate millions? The future king should have been the public's real favorite. Finding solace. As Diana searched for something to hold on to in this lovelessness and cruelty, she often took refuge in her security guards. They were the closest men to her and were tasked with protecting her. One of them was Barry Manicky, who would later confess he had fallen in love with her. Even if Diana wanted to, she couldn't hide such closeness from palace staff who were tasked with reporting to Charles. Indeed, in 1986, Manicky was transferred to another duty and distanced from Diana. A year later, he died in a motorcycle accident. In 1984, Diana became pregnant for the second time. During this period, their relationship had relatively improved. Although Charles hadn't stopped seeing Camilla, it was as if he had given their marriage another chance. But when they learned the second child would also be a boy, this pleasant period ended abruptly. Charles wanted the second child to be a girl, and Diana had learned it would be a boy during a doctor's checkup, but kept it from everyone. When the prince was born, Charles's reaction was, "Oh God, it's a boy, and he's even ginger." The red hair came from Diana's family. Charles had once again revealed that he couldn't tolerate anything that belonged to Diana. Charles left the hospital shortly after the birth and went to play polo the next day. Diana had no crumbs of hope left that their marriage would improve after this. Harry being ginger led to rumors that he was the son of one of Diana's secret loves, James Hewitt. Diana couldn't protect herself or her children from the stones the press threw. She never would have guessed she would miss the attention from when she first joined the family. At least back then, the attention was positive. Now, the more she withdrew, the more they came at her. Every day there was a new story about her. Fergie, a new ally and new complications. As Harry started growing up in the mid-80s, Diana developed a new strategy. The trigger for this strategy would be the family's new daughter-in-law, Princess Sarah Ferguson. Sarah Ferguson, or Fergie as she was known, already knew Diana when she was dating Charles's sister, Prince Andrew's girlfriend. Fergie was the daughter of Major Ronald Ferguson and wasn't exactly a stranger to royal circles. When she married Andrew in 1986, Fergie was 27 years old. Although she initially learned the family's strict rules and how to behave in front of cameras from Diana, who was like a mentor to her, she very quickly surpassed her. Fergie didn't falter in the face of the royal family's judgmental looks and the press's attention like Diana did. The things that troubled Diana excited her. Her age and life experience worked in her favor. She adapted very quickly to the family and became the favorite daughter-in-law. Diana, despite being in the family for quite a while and having given the Queen 2 grandsons, was still like a stranger. Charles, who used to compare Diana to his grandmother, the Queen Mother, now started comparing her to Fergie and asking why she couldn't be like her. Yet when Diana tried to enjoy her position just like Fergie, Charles was the first person to oppress and judge her. For example, in 1985, when they went to watch a show at the Royal Opera House, Diana wanted to surprise him. As a result of her work carried out in great secrecy, she went on stage and performed ballet. Although Charles told the press he was enchanted by Diana's performance, he criticized her mercilessly the first moment they were alone. He accused her of being attention-seeking and dishonorable. Meanwhile, Diana's depression and nausea continued. Rumors about her eating disorder had leaked to the press. That's why Diana made great efforts to be able to eat in front of the press during royal duties. But in reality, there were times when she wouldn't put a single bite of food in her mouth for days. During a Canadian trip, she fainted on the plane. Charles told her in an icy voice that if she was going to faint, she should faint when she was alone. Breaking free, while Diana felt so alone and powerless, holding on to Fergie, who moved like a professional in these official settings, was easy. Fergie was also skilled at stretching the boundaries of her position. Crazy stunts like wearing police uniforms to sneak into Prince Andrew's bachelor party were her work. Wearing police uniforms was a crime, and this issue grew big enough to be taken to Parliament. She turned a room at Windsor Castle where she stayed with Andrew into a disco. At the party after their wedding, she convinced everyone to jump into the pool. Fergie's skill and ease did Diana a lot of good. The press's interest in their ski vacation at the royal property in Klosters, Switzerland, as two couples was enormous. 90 photographers came to photograph them. Diana and Fergie once again ignored the boundaries drawn for them, and gave the press a show with a choreographed scene of them fighting on the ice rink, giving the press unique photos. Although her husband condemned these actions, Diana was regaining her lost confidence with the strength she got from Fergie. She had stopped hiding her playful and attention-loving side. That same week, Diana even left Charles, Andrew, and Fergie at home and went dancing at the town disco. She met and chatted with her childhood friend Philip Dunn there. Lots of love rumors came out about Diana, and this man Charles also knew. Diana's changing attitude with the courage she got from Fergie and her sociability that triggered love rumors were sweet topics for the tabloid press. Fergie and Diana's showy ways created debates about wastefulness among segments opposed to the royal family. The royalist segment thought poor Queen, her daughters-in-law, will destroy everything she built. Every kind of negative headline thrown about Diana, every rumor was worth a lot of money. In 1987, the photographing and weeks of discussion about her giggling while watching young soldiers parade in St. Helier was the result of this tabloid economy. The nationwide outrage caused by the leather pants she wore to a David Bowie concert that fueled Philip Dunn rumors was the same. The turning point. While Diana was being gossiped about with many men, Charles's relationship with Camilla was continuing at full speed. Their marriage was actually over. In fact, it had never existed. But society blamed everything on Diana. The press didn't even mention Camilla's name. The freedom space Diana tried to create for herself, inspired by Fergie, had complicated things even more. The image she created with her calm appearance and elegant smile was destroyed, and she had turned into exactly the kind of magazine figure the press wanted. Her efforts to adapt in the early years of her marriage hadn't worked. Although she thought she had convinced her mind, her body hadn't accepted this pressure and developed an eating disorder. Her attempt to keep up with Fergie had also produced unwanted results. This new image didn't sit well with her. Nothing worked no matter what she did. Everything she did to be loved and accepted was in vain. The sacrifices she made to receive even a little love far from being appreciated, weren't even noticed. No matter what she did, the family, the press, and the public always found a new reason not to love her. She felt increasingly helpless. Her belief that she was a victim of the system solidified, and she felt sorry for herself. Perhaps this equation was wrong from the start. Perhaps she needed to accept the reality that she would never receive love and appreciation and rediscover her own being without listening to what anyone said. Crisis and awakening. In 1988, Diana, Charles, Fergie, and Andrew were on a ski vacation in Closters again. Diana was sick, and Fergie, who was pregnant at the time, was at home resting after falling while skiing. The team, including Charles, Andrew, and Major Hugh Lindsay, was skiing on the mountain. A phone call came to the house. There had been an avalanche on the mountain, but Charles and his friend's fate was uncertain. After a tense wait, news came from Charles. The Major was dead. While everyone was in shock, Diana took control. She packed the Major's belongings in a suitcase. Charles wanted to continue his vacation. Diana thought they should transport the Major's body and belongings to their country themselves. It was very important to support the Major's pregnant wife. She insisted on this. They did what Diana said. Diana had been able to reason much better than Charles about what was right, and could enforce her will by standing strong during a crisis. During this period, Diana began seeing a psychiatrist at a friend's insistence, trying to forget bad experiences from the past. Unlike previous doctors, Dr. Lipsedge kept what Diana told him confidential as it should be, and didn't give information to the royal family. He recommended some books about eating disorders to Diana. Diana read them secretly. Despite Charles's implications during meals and his comments that she would waste what she ate, her work showed results within 6 months. Although her mood deteriorated again during holidays when she stayed with them at the family's other properties, she now felt much better during times when the pressure on her was less. Diana's rebirth led her to confront one of the real reasons for her depression. She would talk about Camilla. Diana's decision to attend the party organized for Camilla's sister, where Charles was of course the guest of honor, had created a huge shock. Diana had been avoiding this confrontation for 7 years. Her avoidance gave great comfort to everyone who knew about the relationship, of course most of all to Charles and Camilla. At one point during the party, Diana saw Charles, Camilla, and another guest chatting downstairs. She asked Charles and Camilla to leave them alone. They did as she said at a run. What Diana said to Camilla was this: "I'm sorry for intruding between you two. Apparently I did. It must be hell for both of you. But I know what's going on. Don't treat me like I'm stupid." This conversation, where she poured her heart out and subtly vomited her venom, did Diana a lot of good. Maybe nothing had changed, but Diana's perspective had changed. Diana's process of rebuilding herself progressed slowly and with ups and downs, but it progressed. The therapist had told her, "Yes, you have to put up with the royal family, but remember, they also have to put up with you." This was exactly what Diana, who had been living her life as a passive wife and mother for quite a while, needed to hear. If trying to adapt wasn't working, she should accept and make them accept that she was incompatible. She wasn't a fairy tale princess waiting to be rescued. The only person who could save her was herself. The new Diana. By the early 90s, Diana's transformation was visible. She started cutting her hair much shorter, in a pixie style. Her voice and speech took on a confident air. She had taken refuge in real issues far from the royal family's fake world. She was doing readings on death and using royal duties to visit patients on their deathbeds. At that time, the number of hospices established for terminally ill patients to spend their last days painlessly and as peacefully as possible increased thanks to Diana's visits. Diana was also closely interested in people living with HIV and visiting clinics, because she had found an area where she could truly be useful. At this time when AIDS paranoia was at its peak, when the virus and its transmission methods were not understood by society, when fear scenarios were rampant, her outstretched hand to people living with HIV meant a lot. Since society thought HIV could even be transmitted by shaking hands, there were people in hospitals who didn't want to stay in the same rooms as people living with HIV. In June 1991, Diana not only shook hands with a child living with HIV, but hugged him. No charity work, no touching speech could make as much noise or create as much awareness as this action. Although Diana's fearless contact with knife-edge issues and people everyone avoided had historical importance, it was rarely applauded in those days. Her courage in political areas was a threat to everything the royal family represented. Her actions were creating outrage not only nationwide but worldwide. On the day Charles gave a speech about education, Diana spoke about AIDS, overshadowing Charles. The palace was desperately struggling to change Diana's schedule. Maybe the old Diana would have doubted herself, withdrawn and adapted. But the old Diana was gone. Even though she often knew the last word would be said by Charles, she tried very hard to do what she wanted, fighting if necessary. She wanted to establish her own charity, the Princess of Wales Trust, but this idea was vetoed by Charles. The prince didn't want donations to the charity to be split in two. In fact, if you ask me, splitting in two would have been an optimistic estimate. If Diana had established her charity, she would have overshadowed the prince within a few weeks, using the privileges of her position that gave her untouchability to be a voice for society's most underprivileged segments had become Diana's life purpose. This way she could be useful. She could carry really important issues to the pages of gossip newspapers that only wanted to talk about her leather pants. She raised William and Harry this way too. From childhood, she wanted them to get acquainted with life and the inevitable reality of death. The PR war. Charles and Diana's marriage had now completely turned into a show window. Since a 1987 trip, the couple hadn't shared the same room. Diana's transformation didn't matter to Charles one bit. He thought her close involvement with patients was for show and visibly ignored Diana at events. When they were alone, he belittled Diana's intellectual background and activism. Therefore, the more time Diana spent with Charles, the more her efforts to build confidence were hindered. She was aware that she needed to become independent from him, but no matter what, she would always be the mother of the future king. She could never break her bond with the palace. Moreover, she would lose all the privileges that came with her position. To emerge strong from this marriage, she had to take slow but sure steps, switching from the stationery with C and D symbols she used for writing letters to her individual symbol was one of these steps. In fact, Camilla's presence now even served Diana's interests. It kept Charles away from home. The PR war between Charles and Diana also started during this period. In 1991, when William had a car accident while at boarding school, and despite a skull fracture and risk of brain damage, Charles left the hospital and continued his daily schedule. He became the target of the press. The next morning, the Sun's headline was, "What kind of father are you?" Charles blamed Diana for this incident too. He claimed she exaggerated the severity of the accident and put him in a bad position. But the palace had realized they needed to repair Charles's melting image. On March 29, 1992, when Diana received news of her father's death, Charles wanted to attend the funeral with her. Diana didn't want to be part of Charles's image work. She wanted the truth to be seen as it was. For her to agree to his request, the matter had to be taken to the Queen. Diana knew Charles's relationship with his sons was limited to sending them fruit through servants and faxing their daily schedules. But meanwhile, the palace was organizing photo shoots for a wonderful father image. Again that same year, the fact that the press also started talking about Charles and Camilla's relationship wasn't a coincidence, if you ask me. The palace was trying to cover up the truth, but Diana wasn't sitting idle either. The separation. In January 1992, on a gloomy Wednesday, Diana and Charles went to the Queen at Sandringham to finally discuss the issue that had been floating around like a fog. It was common knowledge that their marriage wasn't working. It was time for the Queen to handle this annoying situation. The timing was very significant. The meeting took place just a few days before the event celebrating the Queen's 40 years on the throne. Now the monarchy's symbolic existence needed the appearance of a strong family and rock-solid marriages, and now Elizabeth's crown looked less glamorous than ever, her throne more cardboard than ever. It was quite normal for the Queen, who hadn't been outside palaces since birth, who didn't know what it meant to walk alone on the street one evening and miss it, who was trying to protect the only world she knew, not to understand Diana. She suggested the couple have a 3-month cooling off and evaluation period. They did exactly that. But what no one knew at the time was Diana's plan that she had been carrying out in great secrecy for about a year and a half. Diana and Charles's marriage wasn't the first failed marriage in the family. It wouldn't be the last. Princess Margaret had divorced her husband, who came from outside the aristocracy. Princess Anne had officially announced she would divorce her husband, but hadn't divorced yet. Things weren't much different for Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew, who sailed smoothly through this oppressive structure that couldn't get enough praise when they first joined the family. In just a few years, the situation had completely reversed. Fergie didn't have a patient and long-suffering character like Diana. She hadn't even hesitated to argue openly with the Queen Mother. The expected end came. On March 19, 1992, the palace announced that Andrew and Fergie would divorce. Fergie wanted Diana to come with her when leaving the royal family, but she didn't know about Diana's plans either. Diana was aiming for a greater victory than divorce. When she left the family, and was left stark naked among the cannibalistic British press, she had to be thoroughly understood by the public. Her hand had to be strong enough. She couldn't accept that this system, which she entered at 18 and spent 11 years in, would chew her up and then throw her aside like a rag after spitting her out. Diana. Her true story. On June 7, 1992, thanks to the interviews Diana had secretly given, the first part of her story, written over a year and a half, was published in the Sunday Times. Finding a brave publisher to print the book was as difficult as conducting these interviews. When Andrew Morton told Diana they couldn't find a publisher for the book, that no one wanted to take the risk of publishing the details of the Charles-Camilla relationship kept like a state secret, Diana gave him Charles and Camilla's love letters. The stronger the evidence, the less the risk would be. A publisher was found. Now they needed a newspaper to publish it in installments to make the book make noise. The publisher and Morton made an offer of $500,000 to the Sunday Times, but the answer was no. Diana once again stepped in and used her connections to convince the Sunday Times. Meanwhile, to prove the book's credibility, Diana had asked her father to give Andrew Morton photos of her that had never been published anywhere before. To prevent information leaks, the Sunday Times printed these sections of the newspaper in a secret location in Finland. Everyone involved in this secret operation, including the Sunday Times editor, was waiting with their head on the block. When it was finally published, none of their lives would ever be the same again. That day, while the public was discussing these shocking claims and some of the press still didn't dare give them space, Prince Charles went to a polo match. The Queen, who went to watch him, invited Camilla Parker Bowles and her husband Andrew to accompany her. For those with eyes to see, the sides were quite clear. The palace was making statements condemning the claims, saying they were entirely fictitious. They were reaching all the journalists they could, keeping a tight grip on the press. Royal correspondents tried to discredit the claims by staying away from the subject. There were also those who gave space to the views of Charles's friends, who wanted to tell his side. Diana had to play both sides, not to be declared public enemy number one by the palace. She told palace staff, or as she called them, the men in gray suits, that she had nothing to do with the book, that everything was told by her family and friends. But meanwhile, she had to make a move against the palace, which was shouting that the claims were unfounded. At that time, it was known that one of the sources of the claims was Diana's close friend Carolyn Bartholomew. So Diana leaked to the press that she was visiting Carolyn's house so they could take her picture. This photo meant one thing. Diana had supported her friend who had brought forth the claims, so everything was true. The next day wasn't an easy day for Diana. The palace seniors were aware of Diana's move. On top of that, she had an official duty that day. She was going to visit a hospital in Merseyside. She was met with incredible love by the public and couldn't hold back her tears. According to Andrew Morton, what triggered this was an elderly woman caressing her face. The first print run of the book, 50,000 copies, was completely sold out on the morning of June 16, 1992, the day it came out. 10 installments had been printed with the newspaper before the book came out. They had attracted enough interest for the book, in fact, much higher than they estimated. Diana was smart. She had taken many risks, but she was very powerless next to the royal family, actually the royal firm. So was Sarah Ferguson, who found herself in the headlines every week as soon as she left the family. On June 17th, the day after the book came out, the royal family attended the traditional horse races at Ascot. Now Diana and Fergie were unwanted daughters-in-law. Fergie watched the royal family's procession from the sidelines with her daughters. As for Diana, as soon as she left the racing area, she got out of the car she was riding in with Charles, where no one could see, and got into her own car. What happened to Fergie after leaving the family was like a preview for Diana. In August, the Daily Mirror and Daily Mail published private images secretly taken of Fergie on vacation with her lover John Bryan. Water had started seeping through the cracks of the royal family, which stood like a rock in front of the press and public. Squidgygate. It wasn't surprising that Fergie was the first to be cast out. Diana also met the most terrible face of the press in a very short time. On August 24, 1992, the British public woke up to a new scandal, Squidgygate. This gate suffix was inherited from the Watergate scandal in history. Squidgy was the name James Gilby, whom she had grown close to in the late 80s, gave Diana. With the recording of their long, troubled, and romantic phone conversation in the summer of '89 leaking to the press, the public became aware of this truth. James Gilby, in addition to being Diana's confidant at the time, was also the heir to the Gilby's gin brand. In the conversations, Diana said, "I was so bad at lunch, I nearly started crying. I felt so sad and empty that I thought, damn it, I've done so much for this bloody family. I'm so unhappy. Implications are constantly being made, as if I'm going to do something dramatic because I can't stand the pressure of this marriage." They're literally torturing my life. I've made my decision." Diana also mentioned in this conversation that she was afraid of their last meetings with James Gilby being exposed, and said she had suspicions that she might be pregnant again. Throughout the audio recording, James had addressed Diana as Squidgy exactly 14 times. This was a more childish way of saying darling. It was thought that this conversation was recorded by an amateur enthusiast by chance tuning to the right frequency. It wasn't difficult to do that at the time. At the time of this conversation, Prince Charles, Camilla, and her husband, along with Turkish music producer Ahmet Ertegun, were touring the Aegean coasts, visiting AFI establishments. Diana, who had to go everywhere with security guards who were the palace's shadow, who read even her books secretly, the only area she could escape to was the long phone conversations she had in the evening. This safe space was also cruelly taken from her. Aside from the shame this incident caused Diana, the audio recordings actually supported what was told in the book they had managed to publish with great effort. After the Squidgygate scandal, in a meeting with the Queen, Diana and Charles agreed to separate unofficially. By the fall of '92, Diana's lawyers had started negotiations for divorce terms. While the issue of Diana separating her own staff was being discussed, on the other hand, Charles was having his own biography written as a countermove. The separation was finally officially announced on December 9, 1992 by the Prime Minister. The Queen's description of 1992 as the annus horribilis, horrible year, was quite appropriate, but no one could know that the next year would make the previous one look mild. Camillagate. 1993 came with a new scandal from its very first month, Camillagate, or in other words, the Tampongate scandal. This time, a transcript of a phone conversation between Camilla and Charles was leaked. The scandal was called Tampongate because Charles said he wanted to live in Camilla's pants, and then joked, "I'd rather not be a tampon, I hope." In the continuation of this joke, which he dragged out too long, he said, "My luck would be to be thrown in the toilet when you flush, but despite turning around, I'd always stay on the surface and not sink to the bottom." Of course, that wasn't all. Charles said Camilla had endured slander and disrespect for years. Camilla also said, "I'd endure anything for you, that's love." This conversation was old like Diana's, in fact from a similar period, 1989, and the press had access to both recordings much earlier than they published them. You see, when the book was published, all the newspapers that chose the royal family's side actually knew that what was written in the book might be true. Only when this issue grew with a snowball effect, and the profit from publishing the transcripts became a risk worth damaging relations with the royal family, did they publish them. Diana thus saw the content of one of hundreds of whispered conversations that had made her life difficult for years. The truth that caused her to be made to feel crazy for years stood before her, flesh and blood. Stepping back, Diana was still living in Kensington Palace and continuing her official duties alone. But during this process, her war with Charles's PR people continued at full speed. Every trip she was going to take had to go through the approval of his staff, and statements were made against her. The press also got increasingly ugly, since anyone with a camera could sell a Diana photo they took to newspapers for thousands of pounds. Diana's life had become unbearable. In November '93, secretly taken photos by the owner of the gym Diana went to were in the headlines. In December, she announced she would live away from the spotlight for a while. Reportedly, when her actor friend Jeremy Irons told her, "I took a year off from acting," Diana smiled and replied, "Me too." Diana was freed from the strict rules of the royal family. She started dressing as she wanted. She wanted to be able to walk freely on the streets, but every time she went out, she had to run from ambitious photographers. This tabloid economy would bring about the end of Diana's life in 1997. Charles continued his reputation recovery efforts with a documentary released in 1994 on the 25th anniversary of his investiture, titled The Private Man, The Public Role. Diana was barely mentioned in the documentary, but in the interview he gave to the documentary makers, he admitted to cheating on his wife, saying, "I tried to be faithful to her until our marriage broke down irretrievably." He referred to Camilla with the words, "a good friend of mine." The ITV documentary was watched by more than 13 million people the day it aired on television. That same evening, Diana attended an event at the Serpentine Gallery in London in a tight black dress. This dress went down in pop culture history as the revenge dress. That year, Barbara Walters and Oprah Winfrey, names who made interviews that went down in history, reached out to Diana and wanted to interview her. But Diana would save the answer she would give to all this in her own words for the first and last time for the interview she would do in 1995 with Martin Bashir for BBC's Panorama program. The Panorama interview. This process was also conducted in secrecy. Cameramen came to Kensington Palace with small cameras they would use so as not to attract attention. BBC executives also didn't mention this interview to their superiors for fear of censorship. When the interview aired on November 20, 1995, the whole world was talking about what Diana said. Diana spoke openly about depression, eating disorders, and the royal family's mocking attitude toward the mental crisis she experienced. She explained that after 1993, Charles's team launched a smear campaign against her and hindered her work. She compared the PR war between her and Charles to poker and chess. She told how independent photographers said to her, "Come on, Diana, give us a photo so I can send my kid to school to be able to get a photo of her." She spilled all the beans. She also talked about her desire to represent Britain on a diplomatic ground in other countries in the future. But the part of this interview that would be discussed the most for years was this. When Martin Bashir asked, "Do you think Camilla Parker Bowles had a role in the breakdown of your marriage?" Diana said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." At that time, this BBC broadcast became the program that reached the most viewers in broadcasting history. In the following years, the thing that would break the record of this broadcast would be Diana's funeral. Today, it's difficult to access the full recording of this BBC broadcast. It's impossible to find it in open sources. The reason for this is that it emerged in 2021 that BBC and Martin Bashir presented fake bank statements and false documents to convince Diana to do this interview. As a result of this claim, which William and Harry pursued and took to court, the BBC admitted the accusations. The divorce and after. On August 28, 1996, Diana and Charles officially divorced. Diana's Her Royal Highness title was taken away, but she was allowed to use the Princess of Wales title. Custody of the children was shared. On one hand, Diana was managing a secret process with opposition party leader Tony Blair at the time to become Britain's goodwill ambassador. She could now go beyond being a step-back wife, mother, and clothes hanger, and draw her own destiny. In January, she went to Angola for the campaign to ban landmines, and thanks to the iconic photos taken of her walking in a minefield, the issue was brought to the country's agenda. Right-wing politicians didn't like Diana at all. When Labour Party leader Tony Blair became Prime Minister in May 1997, a green light appeared for Diana's future plans. Tony Blair was impressed by Diana's skill in addressing issues others were afraid to touch without drawing backlash. Indeed, Diana could be a very useful figure for the country as a goodwill ambassador. Her next trip was to Bosnia, which was trying to recover after the war. Diana was in demand not only as a diplomat, but also as a sought-after bachelor. Reportedly, one of those trying to win her over was Donald Trump. The final summer. In 1997, Diana grew close to Dodi Fayyad, the son of Saudi Arabian Harrods owner Mohammed Al Fayyad, during a vacation on his yacht. Dodi's mother was writer Samira Khashoggi, the sister of famous arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi. Samira's nephew was journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed in 2018 at the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul. Dodi had lived a life where he received a Rolls-Royce from his father as a birthday present when he was 15 years old. Diana had fallen in love with this man. Their intention was to get married as soon as possible so as not to endure rumors for long. Unfortunately, their relationship would only last 6 weeks. Diana and Dodi decided to spend one night in Paris as a last stop before ending their dreamlike vacation and returning to England. Throughout the journey from the airport to the Ritz Hotel where they would stay, there were photographers on motorcycles around their car. Diana had her hair done at the hotel before dinner and spoke with her son William for the last time that evening. It was also likely that Diana would receive a marriage proposal that evening. Because of the photographers who followed them everywhere, the couple decided to eat in their rooms at the hotel, away from curious looks, instead of going to a restaurant. Before that, they had briefly stopped by Dodi's apartment in Paris. During this time, their rooms were being prepared for dinner. A gift Dodi was going to give Diana was left under the bed. Diana never saw this gift. The fatal night. Their plan to send another car out front as if it were them and escape through the back door to fool the photographers didn't work. They would have to race to the hotel with an army of photographers. The only problem was they didn't know their driver, Henry Paul, was very drunk, having drunk alcohol along with antidepressants. Henry Paul was driving the car like crazy while fleeing from the photographers. When their Mercedes entered the tunnel at over 150 km/h just after midnight, it hit one of the tunnel's concrete pillars and turned upside down. The only survivor was their bodyguard, who was the only person wearing a seatbelt. While the ambulance was on its way, the scene in the tunnel was horrible. Around them were hundreds of photographers trying to photograph this moment. Later, some would claim that one of them opened the car door to capture a better photo. Reportedly, while the flashes were going off non-stop, it hadn't occurred to anyone to call an ambulance. After the incident, 7 photographers were detained, but no evidence was found to punish them. Diana was extracted from the wreckage she was trapped in within an hour, and by then it was too late for everything. According to the autopsy, she lost consciousness at the time of the accident and died 20 minutes later. The aftermath: Diana's brother, Earl Charles Spencer, made this statement on the day of the incident. "Every editor and manager of every publication that has bought unauthorized and private photos of her and encouraged greedy and ruthless photographers willing to sacrifice everything to get a shot of Diana has Diana's blood on their hands." Charles learned the news immediately. He listened to the radio all night. He told his sons the next morning. He and Elizabeth agreed that Diana's funeral should take place like a full member of the royal family. Charles personally brought Diana's coffin, draped according to protocol requirements, to London. Prime Minister Tony Blair gave a touching speech about Diana's loss while addressing the public in his constituency. He said Diana was the people's princess. He was very right. The public demonstrated how right the Prime Minister was by leaving millions of flowers around Buckingham and Kensington palaces. Diana's death was a sign of what the system that fueled society's obsession with celebrities could lead to. Madonna, one of those who knew this system best, hoped everyone would face this truth by saying, "I would like to blame the press, but her blood is actually on all our hands. We all bought and read these magazines." Diana's death was a painful truth that slapped society in the face, that an icon who was unreachable, idealized, and therefore dragged through the mud was a flesh-and-blood human being like everyone else. Facing this simple truth was so difficult for some that the public chased countless conspiracy theories. No matter what perspective you look at history from, you see what a huge breaking point Diana's tragic death created. It's not in vain that I always reference this event in every video I talk about celebrity culture, and that countless academic articles have been written about it for years. Despite all her efforts to adapt, Diana was a test for the dusty monarchy stuck in the past just by her existence. Her funeral was the hardest part of this test. While all flags in the country were lowered to half-mast, the one at Buckingham Palace wasn't. The Queen, Prince Charles, William and Harry stayed at Balmoral Palace in Scotland until the funeral. The public thought the Queen had abandoned them. The press was condemning her for not setting foot in London until the morning of the funeral on September 6th, but her touching speech that started by saying, "As your Queen and as a grandmother," from the balcony at Buckingham Palace, calmed the reactions. This grandmother role would be an image the Queen would use for the rest of her life and reign. At the ceremony, the sight of then 15-year-old William and 12-year-old Harry walking behind Diana's coffin was etched in minds. Elizabeth bowed in a show of respect as Diana's coffin passed. Earl Spencer criticized the royal family in his funeral speech. Historians would remember this day as the day the strict hierarchy within the royal family gave way to a more egalitarian era. After Diana, the waters in the royal family never calmed down. What came after? Camilla and Charles announced their relationship in 1999. In 2002, at the Queen's Golden Jubilee, Camilla took her place in the royal camera. They were waiting for the waters to calm down before getting married. The number of people advocating that Charles should never become king and that when the Queen died, the crown should pass to William was not small at all. When then-bachelor Prince Harry, who had a wild nightlife at the time, went to a Halloween party in a Nazi uniform, it was the last straw for Charles. Clearly, the waters would never calm down. Waiting was meaningless. The couple married in 2005. With the Queen's death in 2022, Charles became king, and Camilla received the title of Queen Consort. Today, Prince William continues his marriage with his wife, Princess Kate, who has been his girlfriend since university. Prince Harry, as you know, completely left royal life with Meghan Markle. They're not very successful in their goal of being America's royal couple either. When it came out that Prince Andrew, once the Queen's favorite, was a close friend of Jeffrey Epstein, he too had to abandon his life in the public eye. Sarah Ferguson writes books and continues some public duties, in a sense living a life Diana might have lived. In fact, in 2008, when Turkey's hopes of joining the EU were at their peak, she was tried in Ankara courts because of the footage she secretly made in care homes where mentally disabled children were kept, and the human rights violations she exposed. In 2011, Turkey requested that an arrest warrant be issued for Fergie, but England refused this request. I have no doubt that if Diana had lived, she would have caused diplomatic crises like Fergie. Maybe today she would be speaking out for the people of Gaza. Who knows? Reflections. Don't think I'm saying these things because I'm romanticizing the hands extended from Europe to the rest of the world. On the contrary, this story exposes with every detail that England's free press fairy tale is just a fairy tale. In his book, Andrew Morton says this when describing Diana's 1995 BBC interview: "If this program had been the fugitive manifesto of a Middle Eastern princess, there would have been angry protests in Europe against oppressive regimes." Very true. Naked truths have the sweet habit of slapping the system's hypocrisy in our faces. As always these days, the system is trying to squeeze women into obedient wife and self-sacrificing mother roles to ensure its own continuity. Diana may have witnessed this in one of modern Europe's most oppressive institutions. We continue to struggle every day with oppressions dressed in different guises. Diana's story is that of a woman who lived 28 years ago, but her struggle resonates today. She wasn't perfect. She had her flaws, made mistakes, and sometimes made questionable decisions. But she also showed immense courage in standing up to one of the world's most powerful institutions. She used her position to shed light on issues that desperately needed attention: HIV/AIDS stigma, landmines, hospice care, at a time when no one else with her platform would dare. The tragedy is that the same media machine that built her up also tore her down, and ultimately contributed to her death. The paparazzi who chased her through that tunnel in Paris were the inevitable conclusion of a system that commodified her humanity, that reduced her to photo opportunities and headlines. Diana's legacy is complex. She was both a victim and an icon, both powerless and powerful, both trapped and free. She showed that even in a gilded cage you can find your voice, that even when the whole world is watching, you can tell your own story, that speaking your truth, no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against you, matters. 28 years after her death, we're still talking about Diana, still analyzing what she meant, what she means, and perhaps that's the point. Her story refuses to be simple, refuses to be put away neatly, just like Diana herself refused to be what everyone wanted her to be. She was the people's princess, not because she was perfect, but because she was human, and in being human, flawed, struggling, fighting, she gave millions of people permission to be human too. We can end the royal family series here. If there's another royal family member whose story you'd like me to tell, don't hesitate to mention it in the comments. Of course, don't forget to like the video, hype it up, and if you're not already subscribed, subscribe. See you in the next video. Take care.